My name's Dr. Annabelle Manalo-Morgan. You can call me Dr. Annabelle. I'm a cell and developmental biologist, born in Canada, but I've actually been in the United States since I was 17. I started in neuroscience at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and then moved on to do cell and developmental biology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, where my family and I live now. My focus there has been cardio-oncology, where we look at chemotherapies and their offset effects and how they cause heart disease. We all know that chemotherapies are quite toxic. They do what they do against cancer cells, but then they could hurt other organs. So I was lead on that project for 7 years, being a mom at the same time. And in 2016, while I was still working on that project, looking at cancer cells every day, we were really at the end and at the forefront of some incredible findings. My son, Gramps and I's son, his name is Macario. He was born and he had a stroke at birth. He was having 200 to 500 seizures a day immediately following that stroke. And life changed at that point. You're not Dr. Annabelle anymore, you're mom, trying to figure out a way and just be obedient to the process. What's next? What are the medications? What can we do? He went under a medically induced coma at 2 weeks old. It didn't work. Every drug regimen, every different diet, eating out of a tube, and just constantly having seizures. Ultimately, when he turned 28 days old, which is 5 weeks old, little baby, there was a surgery done on him that has never been done before. They removed 38% of his left brain. So Macario is missing pretty much all of his left brain if you were to look on an MRI. He's missing all of his temporal lobe, occipital lobe. And the reason why they chose to remove 38% and not 50%, which is traditionally what they do, is because they were trying to preserve as much as they could. Specifically, there is a motor strip in that region that the doctors were hoping to preserve. But anyways, after 9 hours of a surgery, where he flatlined a few times and had 3 blood transfusions, we were able to bring Macario home. Gramps and I had 2 other young children at the time that were home waiting for us to get home for a month. You know, we were in the hospital for all that time. And we were prepared to take what God gave us at this point. A child that had to eat out of a tube, a child that would never use the right side of his body because he's missing all of his left brain, a child that would never do anything for himself because he's missing so much of brain that is responsible for our everyday function, very small functions. The part of the brain he's missing is responsible for memory, communication, spatial organization. So for instance, if he saw a cup and told himself, I want to grab that cup, he wouldn't be able to distinguish exactly where it is. And by the time he would go to gather that cup, he would probably forget he wanted that cup. So short-term memory, long-term memory. So we knew that we had quite a road ahead of us with this child. I still went to work every day. I had to. I mean, I was under a very serious project. So I had to go to work. And I came home one day, Macario was 6 months old. And he was bigger because we're feeding him in a tube. And so he's bigger. But he's no different than a newborn baby. He's not even smiling at you. You know, 6 months, you're supposed to be maybe crawling, but definitely smiling, moving around, eating, making a mess. He was bigger, but he was just like a newborn baby. So I just decided at that point, it was literally his 6-month birthday. I decided at that point, maybe God made me a scientist for a reason. It was the first time I really took a deep dive into what medicines he's taking, what they're doing. Remember, I'm a cell and developmental biologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. We're actually the ones that create medicines and understand how cells work and what happens when cells are abnormal. So this stuff is, plain English to me. right? And I started to think about it and realize that these 7 medications my son was on was bombarding his ability to develop. He's not going to develop. Yes, it's protecting his brain. Yes, but it's just essentially putting a Band-Aid on his brain, right? We're not actually helping him to develop. We're not actually encouraging what's called neuroplasticity, which means the ability of their brain to adapt to change. In his case, adapt to the area that's lost. So we're not allowing that to happen. God made us very defensive. He has given us all the tools to adapt to change. We have all the tools to heal. But in some instances, when we're given medications, yes, the medications work, but they also inhibit other processes, like that natural healing process. And in a Macario who's so young, I wanted to give his brain the ability to just give it a chance to heal on its own, start to develop. Who knows what's going to come of it? Of course, he's still missing a huge chunk of his brain. So long story short, I went into the lab, told nobody but my husband, Gramps, and started to think of ways, went to the research and went to my reagents and started to think of ways that I could replace the medication that he's on safely, and just give his brain a chance to perform what's called neuroplasticity. Formulated him a medicine, took me a few weeks to get to the point where I felt it was safe and I had nothing to lose. Safety was my number one concern. I chose a cannabinoid from Cannabis, CBD. You know, this is 2016, right before it became a trend. But I chose it because the little bit of research out there showed me that, wow, maybe this can reduce what's called neuroinflammation. Maybe this could help homeostasis within the brain. Maybe it could drive his brain to make these connections that they're not able to make right now. That's it. That's all I wanted the chance to give him to do. There wasn't cannabis on the market that I could just go buy and try. And quite honestly, if there was, and there was a few, it was illegal at the time in Tennessee. It still is. And there's no data to back up what's out there. And I'm a scientist. So I just decided to make my own. I started to give this medication through his tube, his feeding tube. I went cold turkey on all of his pharmaceuticals. I don't recommend anybody to do that, but it's a different kind of high when a mom's trying to save her child's life. And like I said, I told Gramps and I didn't tell anybody. And within 2 days, his eyes started to move around. And usually we couldn't even see his right eye because he's missing all of the left occipital lobe that's responsible for that muscular function. His right eye was perfect and it was moving with the other. And then it was like he was playing catch up in life. 2 months later, he's crawling and he's not favoring left over right. He's using that right side. He's missing the area responsible for muscular control on that right side. Nope, he's crawling left and right. By 14 months, he was walking. And today he's 7 years old. He's in the 2nd grade in Nashville, Tennessee. He has no developmental deficits. He's a perfectly normal 7-year-old boy. And that's the story of Macario.
My name is Dr. Adrian Waterman, a pain specialist in Barbados, as well as an anesthesiologist. Do you know that already doctors in Barbados are prescribing medical cannabis? And in fact, that pharmacies are already distributing medical cannabis to patients? You can only use or consume medical cannabis legally in Barbados if it's prescribed by a registered medical practitioner. If you are the parent or the guardian of a minor, you must obtain in writing a certificate indicating the use of medical cannabis in the minor. You must also give informed consent for the use of the medical cannabis in the minor too as well. If you are a patient that requires assistance, you can designate a person over the age of 18 years old and approved by the courts to to be your caregiver. This caregiver is going to be responsible for the administration and the appropriate dosage of medical cannabis to you, and is also for monitoring the use of medical cannabis. And remember, if your prescription requires repeated usage over a period of 3 months, your pharmacy or your therapeutic facility cannot dispense more than a 30-day supply of individual doses at any time.
For more information, visit our website at www.bmcla.bb.
Medicinal cannabis has been the champion in saving my son's life. If I didn't find cannabis, I don't know if I would have this story. I specifically was looking at natural compounds. So when you start diving into science, you don't, it's not like Googling. You don't look at, cannabis or mushroom. You really look at molecules and compounds. And quite honestly, as I was reading, I didn't realize I was reading about CBD. Because again, the research is very scattered. But what I learned within that time with my son is that this is not just a medicine, right? This is a vital tool. And the reason why it's a vital tool is because it doesn't just go and, remove an infection or, fix a broken joint. Definitely doesn't do that. But what it does is it promotes that self-healing that we were talking about. Cannabis, these cannabinoids, and there's so many, they can come in and they work naturally with our body. We have a system that specifically adheres to these compounds. And that's why there's no side effects. That's why there's no one overdosing on cannabis, is because these are very natural to us. And so what cannabis did in the case of Macario was really a tool to enforce that homeostasis, to enforce that redirection, that neuroplasticity. I always use that word because it's that adaptation. We're constantly having to adapt to change. We don't see what's going on inside. We don't see it until it's way gone past, right? To the point where we have to go to the doctor. But cannabis can go in and ensure those connections are clean and clear, that we have this adaptation to all these changes that are going inside. And the brain is the mothership. And cannabis works very powerful in that mothership to be able to redirect and allow for healing to take place holistically. And so it's not like it was a temporary medication. This is cannabis. Okay, how long do I have to take it? Macario's on this constant, but he'll go a week without needing it. It's not a spontaneous solution. It's a longevity scheme to natural healing, right? And so I make sure he gets the doses in his food and his oils and just constantly revitalizing his body. And cannabis was absolutely the tool for his healing and is going to be the tool for many other people's healing if we're allowed to do the research. And if we are allowed to have access to this plant to do that research, that's all it's going to take. We can't just say that it's a medicine without being able to put the proof behind it. And we need that ability. So I wrote a book with Forbes Books. And the reason why I chose Forbes was because I wanted an audience that usually wouldn't get behind cannabis. So I chose Forbes. They've been a great partner. And the book is entitled Mighty Flower, How Cannabis Saved My Son. And Mighty Flower is, of course, signifies the plant and cannabis, which has been so instrumental in our lives, period. I mean, spiritually, on my husband's side of the family, my husband, Gramps Morgan, has not smoked a day in his life. He's a Rasta. So there's that misconception there. He's never smoked a day in his life. He's never had a drink a day in his life. But the spiritual understanding of the plant lives within his side of the family. Medicinally, cannabis has been everything for my family. It's every child in my family, my parents, my brother, we all kind of have shifted and adapted to the story of Macario. And I wrote this book because Mighty Flower also means the courage of me, the courage of a mother to do whatever you have to do, whether it's illegal, whatever you have to do for your baby. There's nothing a mom won't do for a baby. And for me, luckily, God made me a scientist, specifically in neuroscience, which is the development of the brain, and cell and developmental biology, which is the development of those cells, where I didn't specifically focus on one disease or another. I have a very worldly or global view of the body because of my expertise. And so God couldn't have given Macario a more prepared mother. And I had to write about it for several reasons: to give people hope, to give people courage, and for them to know that miracles are real. Sometimes finding that way is a journey in itself, but behind every tragedy, God will bring a blessing. I believe that. I certainly believe that. And so I wanted to give people that inspiration, but also to give cannabis its flowers. Cannabis historically has been a plant that has healed nations before our time, in Jesus' time. You'd hear about the Egyptians using it and the Indians using it in drinks. And again, spiritually, but definitely medicinally. But also, what about the hemp and how we've used it for rope and for building and for every use you can imagine, quite honestly. This cannabis plant has so much that we can gain from in life. And this is ancient wisdom. How do we use that ancient wisdom? Acknowledge it. Let's acknowledge it. Let's acknowledge this plant is medicine. Let's acknowledge that this plant needs to be available to the whole world. I think the question is how, right? We live in a world where regulation matters. Okay, so let's get the science done. Let's create specific medicines for autism. Let's create specific medicines for pain, for cancer, for Parkinson's. We haven't even been allowed to do that research because the plant has been banned from us. So that memoir is a pathway to a story that I feel like everybody in this world can relate to. We all have loved ones. We've all suffered and have had tragedies. We've all had to look at and stare at a wall with no options. What do I do? And so to be able to come out of that, I have to share that. It's a duty to share that. But cannabis itself, it deserves flowers. And I think that there are still so many people that just refuse to even be educated on a plant that could help them, and a plant that could benefit their own family for whatever reason. Is it business? Is it politics? What is it? I don't know. There have been people who have had bad experiences with cannabis, true. But we've all had bad experiences with, we've fallen. Does that mean you take out the stairs? So, education has to be at the forefront. That's why I wrote that book. I'm never set out to be an author, but I had a story to tell that's a blessing, and I have this knowledge to share. And, and I continue to push that book, and I continue to push my son's story. I came to Barbados to share my son's story. I think it's definitely relatable, but also to share the importance of cannabis and the beauty of cannabis. I think, like in Barbados and so many other countries, there's this stigma. And if we can just get past that stigma by being open to education. The education is now flowing. And as that comes out, remove everything you may think about this plant, because it can heal you and it can heal your family and your loved ones. But we need the acceptance of the people. We need the acceptance of the government to be able to study and bring a light to the medicinal side of this plant. And once that happens, Barbados itself will be a better place. And, you know, this plant is about love. And here in the islands, all you see when you walk outside is just love for the people. And this plant is given to us as a medicine. And so if we could just open ourselves to just educating one another, there's no harm in education. Then this plant can be studied here. It can be made available here for our loved ones. And it can be a place that can be an example to the rest of the Caribbean of what the acceptance of medicinal cannabis can do for the people.